My own brother looked across a crowded dinner table and told me I wasn't fit to share our family's last name, but he didn't know our grandfather had been watching him fail for months. I'm Elena Martinez, 30 years old. I once believed that shame needed a raised voice to truly wound you. But that evening, humiliation arrived wrapped in a confident smile right as the main course was being cleared. My brother Marco leaned backward in his chair, his eyes fixed on me with the patience of someone who had rehearsed this moment for years, and announced loud enough for every relative to hear, "Elena, you don't belong in this bloodline." No one laughed. That silence was the cruelest part. My mother, Clara, gave a tiny nod, the kind that carries decades of unspoken agreement. My father, Robert, dropped his gaze to his wine glass, suddenly fascinated by the way light bent through the rim. For 3 heartbeats, the room became a photograph. Why didn't anyone defend her? And what was hiding inside the envelope beside her grandfather's coffee? Everyone stared at me the way you watch a coffee cup teetering on the edge of a table, waiting for the fall. I felt he'd rise up my neck, but I refused to hand him the breakdown he was starving for. Marco kept smirking, already certain he had shoved me back into whatever box the family had built for me years ago. Then the chair at the head of the table scraped hardwood. My grandfather, Hector Martinez, rose slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. Somehow that stillness made the entire room go quieter than a held breath. He turned to Marco and said, "Then she'll take my name, and everything attached to it." Marco's smile vanished so fast it looked painful. His fingers whitened around his crystal glass. "No," he whispered, then louder, "Grandfather, you cannot do this to me." That was the moment I understood this dinner had never been about a last name at all. It was about a secret decision my family had already treated as final. What decision? And why was the family lawyer sitting 2 seats away from the birthday cake? Before I explain what Marco didn't know, let me ask you, what's the weather like where you're watching from? Is it stormy or calm? And does that match how you're feeling today? Also, drop a pin in the comments. Where in the world is this story reaching you? I want to see how far this travels. To understand why those words cut so deep, you need to know what the Martinez name actually meant. I grew up as Elena Reed, taking my father's surname. But the name that opened doors, that made creditors wait and city officials call back, was my mother's side, Martinez. My grandfather, Hector Martinez, built that reputation with nothing but stubbornness. He started with a single failing auto repair shop on the flood-prone side of town, 2 borrowed lifts, and a habit of answering his phone at 2 a.m. when no one else would. Over 30 years, that grimy garage became Martinez Industrial, a company that repaired water pumps, traffic light systems, and emergency generators across 3 counties. Later, Grandpa turned half of the old warehouse into a free training program for kids who couldn't afford trade school but needed a ladder out of poverty. In our city, Martinez didn't mean wealth. It meant dependability. It meant when the river rose, someone picked up the phone. But what happens when a family twists that legacy into a weapon? Inside our home, that meaning slowly curdled into status. My mother, Clara, worshipped the respect the Martinez name brought her. My father, Robert, had married into that world and survived by nodding at whoever spoke loudest. And my brother Marco, 2 years older than me, learned early that a confident voice and an expensive watch could make people mistake arrogance for destiny. Marco worked in commercial real estate, selling riverfront parcels to developers who used words like revitalization while erasing neighborhoods. Every deal he closed became a family announcement. Every photo of him in a tailored suit was proof he was going somewhere. Every time he interrupted someone, my mother called it leadership. Every time I stayed calm, she called it passivity. I became a city engineer, flood control division. My job had no glamour. I spent my days studying drainage maps, pipe age reports, and floodplain models that most people ignore until their basement fills with river water. Grandpa understood that work. He was the only one who asked real questions. Which neighborhoods flood first? How many homes can one pump station save? When I answered, he listened like my words had weight. At home, my mother would smile absently and say, "That sounds nice, honey," then immediately ask Marco about his latest closing. My father would nod without looking up from his phone. Marco would laugh and call me the so girl, as if keeping an entire district from drowning was a hobby. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. Meaningful work doesn't need applause. But there's a special kind of pain in being useful to strangers while being invisible to your own blood. What Grandpa said next would change everything, but only after Marco made a fatal miscalculation. Grandpa used to tell me, "A name isn't a trophy, Elena. It's a promise." I didn't realize then that he was watching, measuring, waiting to see who understood the difference between carrying a name and cashing it in. Marco thought the answer had to be him. My mother agreed. My father never said it out loud, but his silence leaned heavily in Marco's direction. Then, 3 weeks before Grandpa's 79th birthday dinner, Marco made a toast at Sunday lunch that stopped the table cold. He raised his glass, smoked, and said, "Grandpa built the Martinez name, but I'm the one who'll finally sell it for what it's worth." My mother laughed like he'd quoted Shakespeare. My father smiled into his coffee. Grandpa did not laugh. He only stared at Marco with an expression I couldn't read. That was the first time I felt the ground shift. I thought Marco was simply arrogant. I had no idea he had already started turning Grandpa's life work into a handshake deal. 2 weeks before the birthday dinner, the family group chat began to feel less like planning and more like a stage Marco had built for himself. My mother told everyone to keep the evening free. Grandpa's birthday will be very special this year. She added that we should dress nicely, arrive on time, and avoid unnecessary drama. In my family, avoid drama always meant don't make Marco face consequences. A few minutes later, Marco posted a photo of himself standing next to a man in a navy suit outside a glass office tower. The caption read, "Big things coming for the Martinez name." What was Marco hiding behind that smile? And why did my father call me with a warning? My stomach tightened. Marco had never cared about the training workshop. He'd never volunteered there. He didn't know a single apprentice's name. He once complained that the old building smelled like oil and broken dreams. But he cared deeply about land, especially the riverfront parcel where the workshop sat, which developers had been circling for years. 2 days later, my father called during my lunch break. His voice had that careful quality he used when he wanted me to accept something unfair. "Your brother has been working on a proposal. Your mother is very excited. I just want you to promise you won't make things uncomfortable at dinner. Have you ever been asked to be silent so someone else could be comfortable?" I asked, "What kind of proposal?" He sighed. "It's about modernizing the family assets." Marco's language. Not protecting the workshop. Not expanding the training fund. Modernizing assets. I asked if Grandpa had approved it. My father paused too long. Then, "Just be supportive, Elena. This could be good for everyone." After the call, I stared at a floodplain map on my screen, but all I could see was the old Martinez building. The workshop sat on valuable riverfront property. Developers wanted it because the neighborhood had changed, warehouses into wine bars, repair shops into boutique gyms. Families who had lived there for 40 years were being priced out one renovated block at a time. I knew that pattern. When wealthy outsiders call a neighborhood underutilized, they mean they've stopped seeing the people who actually live there. That night, Marco emailed the family a glossy PDF titled, "A Future Worthy of the Martinez Legacy." The first page showed luxury condos with rooftop gardens and private parking. The old workshop was gone. The training bay was gone. The courtyard where apprentices learned to weld had been replaced by a coffee shop for residents. Marco called the plan a bold transformation. He called the workshop emotionally significant but financially inefficient. He called the apprenticeship fund a legacy brand opportunity. Not a promise. Not a responsibility. A brand. The deeper I read, the worse it got, and then I found the page with my name missing from the payout list. The proposal included selling the land to a developer called Mercer Partners, with Marco negotiating a personal consulting fee. He suggested using the Martinez name in the building's marketing. He proposed shrinking the apprenticeship program into a small scholarship with a photo wall in the lobby, something rich residents could admire without ever meeting the kids whose futures had been sold. By the last page, my hands were shaking. The next morning, I called Carlos, a former apprentice from the workshop who now ran emergency pump maintenance for 2 hospitals. He told me rumors had already started. A developer had toured the block. Someone had asked about clearing out the training equipment before spring. Before we hung up, Carlos's voice went quiet. "Elena, that place saved my life. Please don't let them turn it into a lobby decoration." That was when I stopped thinking like the daughter nobody listened to and started thinking like the engineer Grandpa respected. I pulled public records, tax documents, trust language, flood zone reports, and grant conditions tied to the program. By the end of the week, I had a 14-page analysis showing exactly what Marco's proposal would cost in legal risk, public trust, community damage, and broken promises. I didn't send it to the family chat. Marco would have turned it into a performance. My mother would have called me jealous. My father would have asked why I couldn't let people be happy. Instead, I sent it directly to Grandpa with one sentence: "I'm not trying to interfere, but I think you should see what this plan would really do." He replied 4 hours later, "Thank you. I needed facts, not noise." For the first time in weeks, I felt steady. But Marco was moving like a man who had already won. He ordered a new suit. He hired a photographer. He told cousins he was preparing to step up for the family. My mother told everyone Grandpa was finally ready to recognize leadership. Nobody said Marco's name directly. They didn't have to. By the time I walked into that dinner, I was no longer afraid of being ignored. I was afraid of what Marco would destroy if no one stopped him. Grandpa's birthday dinner was held at a restaurant built inside the original Martinez repair shop, the same brick building where he had once worked 16-hour days with grease under his fingernails and unpaid invoices in his notebook. The owners had preserved pieces of the old place on purpose: iron beams across the ceiling, black and white photos on the walls. In one photo, Grandpa stood beside 3 teenage apprentices, all holding tools, all grinning like someone had just handed them a future. I arrived 10 minutes early with a small gift bag in one hand and a folder tucked inside my coat. I had promised myself I wouldn't use that folder unless I had to. I didn't want to ruin Grandpa's birthday. I didn't want to fight in front of relatives, donors, old employees, and foundation people. But the moment I stepped inside, I realized this was never going to be a normal birthday dinner. There were place cards, printed menus, 2 long tables arranged like a boardroom pretending to be a family gathering. At the far end, beside Grandpa's seat, sat our family attorney, Mr. Devereaux, who had handled Martinez documents since before I was born. Lawyers don't attend birthday dinners for cake. My mother saw me first. She wore pearls and the smile she reserved for strangers. "Elena, you made it," she said, as if my arrival was a minor detail. Before I could answer, Marco walked in behind me, and the entire room shifted toward him. My mother's face brightened. She straightened his collar and announced, "There he is, the future of this family." Marco laughed softly, pretending to be embarrassed, but he glanced at me to make sure I'd heard. He looked polished, expensive, and utterly certain of himself. My father stood near the bar holding a glass of water he wasn't drinking. He gave me a quick nod, then looked away. That was his specialty, almost kindness, almost courage, almost fatherhood. I moved toward the table and noticed an open seat near Grandpa. For half a second, I thought maybe it was mine. Then my mother touched my arm. "Oh, sweetheart, you're over here." She guided me to a chair halfway down the table between a distant cousin and one of my father's girlfriends. Marco took the seat beside Grandpa like it had always belonged to him. Do you see what he was doing? Arranging the courtroom before the judge entered. Grandpa hadn't arrived yet. That mattered. Marco was setting the scene. While guests mingled, he moved from person to person, shaking hands and dropping polished phrases: vision, growth, opportunity, legacy. He used the Martinez name like a stolen key, testing it in every lock. I heard him tell one of Grandpa's old business partners that the workshop was underperforming land. I heard him tell a donor that younger leadership could repackage the mission. I heard him tell a developer-looking man near the doorway that the family was emotionally attached but ready. Ready for what? I wanted to ask. Ready to erase 60 years of work? Ready to sell the place where kids learned to build instead of disappear? Instead, I stood near the wall and reminded myself that timing mattered. If I spoke too soon, Marco would make me look bitter. If I spoke too emotionally, my mother would call me sensitive. If I spoke without proof, my father would stare at the floor and let the room decide I was jealous. Then Marco came up beside me with a glass of sparkling water. He watched the room, pleased with himself, then leaned close enough that only I could hear him. Try not to bring up pipes, permits, or poor people tonight. Grandpa deserves ambition. Something cold moved through my chest. I knew Marco could be cruel. But what stunned me was how comfortable he sounded, as if compassion was embarrassing, as if the people Grandpa had spent his life helping were dirty details that might ruin Marco's moment. I turned to answer, but then I saw Grandpa in the entrance. He had heard enough. I could tell by his face, not angry. Still. Deeply, dangerously still. Marco didn't notice. He was too busy smiling at his own reflection in the windows. Grandpa walked in, and the room softened around him. People greeted him with real respect, the kind earned over decades. He hugged my mother, shook my father's hand, accepted Marco's loud birthday greeting, and then looked across the room at me. For 1 second, his eyes held mine. I don't know what he saw in my face, but I know what I felt in his: patience, warning, maybe sorrow. Dinner began with polite smiles, but Marco couldn't stop himself from performing. The first course had barely been served before Marco began holding court. Every topic became a doorway back to him. If someone mentioned the city's riverfront, Marco talked about property values. If someone mentioned Grandpa's old repair contracts, Marco talked about expansion. If someone mentioned the apprenticeship program, Marco smiled like he was tolerating an adorable family tradition and said, "Of course the mission matters, but every mission needs a modern model." My mother looked at him like he was delivering wisdom from a mountaintop. "Marco understands how the world works," she said, loud enough for the entire table to hear. My father smiled weakly and took another sip of water. I watched Grandpa more than Marco. Grandpa ate slowly, listened closely, and said almost nothing. That silence made Marco bolder. He mistook it for approval. About 20 minutes into dinner, one of Grandpa's old friends, Mr. Diaz, turned to me and asked about a stormwater project I had helped manage on the east side. For once, the table near me quieted enough for me to answer. I explained that the neighborhood had flooded 3 times in 5 years, and that the new pump schedule and drainage redesign had helped protect nearly 200 homes during the last heavy storm. I wasn't bragging. I was just answering. Marco laughed before I finished. "That's cute," he said, leaning back. "But I think tonight is more about real money, not city maintenance." The words landed like a slap. A few people gave uncomfortable smiles. Mr. Diaz's expression cooled. My mother gave me a warning look, as if I had been rude. I set my fork down and said nothing. Marco loved silence when he thought it meant surrender. He described his proposal, though no one had officially asked him to. He talked about the riverfront property like he had discovered it himself, not like Grandpa had spent half his life saving it from creditors, floods, and developers. Marco called the land undervalued. He called the workshop symbolic. He called the apprentices a beautiful part of the story. That phrase made my stomach turn. A story is something you tell. Those apprentices were people. Some had criminal records. Some had aged out of foster care. Some were supporting younger siblings. Some had been told their whole lives they would never be useful to anyone. Martina's works gave them skills, paychecks, references, and pride. Marco reduced them to decoration. I glanced toward the service station and saw Carlos standing with two former apprentices who had catered the event as a favor to Grandpa. His jaw was tight. He had heard everything. I finally spoke. What happens to the apprentices if the workshop closes? Marco turned his head slowly, like I had interrupted a wedding toast. They adapt, he said. Successful people always do. The room changed after that. No one shouted. No one slammed the table. But something shifted. Mr. Diaz looked down. One cousin stopped smiling. The developer near the end of the table glanced toward Grandpa, maybe wondering if Marco had said too much. My mother rushed in to soften it, but she only made it worse. Elena, tonight is not the time for your little causes, she said. This is about your grandfather's legacy. I looked at her and felt something old inside me loosen. For years, I had tried to make her understand me gently. I had explained my work, minimized my hurt, swallowed small humiliations, and accepted half apologies. But hearing her call human futures my little causes made me realize she had understood perfectly. She simply valued Marco's ambition more. Marco smiled again, reassured by her support. He lifted his glass. Look, change makes some people uncomfortable. But not everyone is built to carry a family forward. Some people maintain things. Other people lead. My mother nodded. My father stared at his plate. Grandpa's eyes stayed on Marco. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave with a smile on their face? Marco kept going, enjoying himself. He said the Martinez name needed someone visible, someone with relationships, someone who could walk into a room and command respect. He said the family had been too sentimental for too long. Every sentence sounded polished, but underneath it, I heard the message he had given me my whole life. You are small. You are boring. You are in the way. I could have pulled out my folder then. I could have corrected his numbers, exposed his consulting fee, explained the grant restrictions, and shown everyone how little he understood about the trust he wanted to control. But Grandpa had not moved. He had always treated patience like strength. So I waited. Dessert arrived. Candles were brought out. Everyone sang. And then Mr. Devereaux placed a grey envelope beside Grandpa's coffee cup. Marco noticed it immediately. His posture changed. He straightened his jacket, smoothed his tie, and looked around as if preparing for applause. My mother's eyes shone with expectation. My father looked pale. Grandpa folded his hands. Before I say anything, I'd like to hear what Marco believes the Martinez name means. That was the invitation Marco had been waiting for. He stood, thanked Grandpa, thanked the family, and talked about honor, future, and difficult decisions. Then his gaze slid toward me, and the warmth drained from his voice. Of course, he said, some people are attached to the past because the past is the only place they feel important. He smiled. Some people hide behind quiet work and call it character. But a family name like ours deserves more than someone who fixes drains and writes reports. My mother did not stop him. My father did not stop him. Grandpa did not stop him. Marco took their silence as permission. Then he finally said the sentence he had been circling all night. The room went so quiet I could hear my own pulse. Marco looked directly at me, his smile sharp with satisfaction, and said, Elena, you don't deserve to carry our last name. For a moment, nobody breathed. Even the servers near the doorway froze. My mother gave a small nod. Quick, unmistakable, the kind that doesn't need words because it has years of agreement behind it. My father lowered his eyes to his plate, and somehow that hurt almost as much as Marco's voice. It's strange what you notice when someone tries to erase you in public. I noticed the chip on my water glass. I noticed the candlelight shaking against the wall. I noticed Marco's hand resting near the grey envelope, like he already owned whatever was inside it. Everyone waited for me to fall apart. That had always been the role they understood for me. Elena absorbs. Elena stays quiet. Elena lets the family move on. But I did not cry. I did not beg. I did not defend myself. I looked at Marco and finally saw him clearly. He wasn't just my brother being cruel. He was a man trying to turn humiliation into proof that he deserved power. Then Grandpa's chair scraped against the floor. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Grandpa stood slowly, one hand on the table, the other near his coffee cup. Marco's smile brightened for half a second, because he thought Grandpa was rising to bless him. My mother sat straighter. My father closed his eyes. Grandpa looked at Marco first. You think she's not worthy of the family name? Marco gave a short laugh, nervous, but still confident. I think someone had to say it. Grandpa nodded once. Then she'll carry mine, and everything that comes with it. Marco's face emptied. The color drained out of him so quickly that several people noticed. His fingers tightened around the back of his chair. No, he whispered. Then louder, Grandfather, you cannot do this to me. Grandpa's voice stayed calm. I didn't do this to you. You brought me the truth and called it leadership. Marco shook his head. You don't understand. I was trying to protect what you built. No, Grandpa said. You were trying to sell what you didn't own. Grandpa turned to Mr. Devereaux, who opened the grey envelope and removed several documents. My mother's hand flew to her necklace. Dad, maybe this should be private. Grandpa didn't look at her. He made his judgment of Elena public. The correction will be public too. Marco tried to laugh, but the sound came out thin. Grandpa picked up the first page. For 6 months, Marco has held meetings with Mercer partners while implying he had authority from the Martinez Trust. He did not. The developer at the end of a table shifted. Marco's jaw tightened. Grandpa continued. He proposed selling the original workshop property, closing the apprenticeship floor, and using the Martinez name to market luxury housing. A murmur moved through the room. My mother whispered, "It was just an idea." Grandpa looked at her. An idea doesn't require a consulting fee. Marco's eyes widened. There it was, the part he thought nobody would say out loud. Grandpa lifted another page. The proposal includes a personal fee to Marco if the sale is completed. It also recommends reducing the apprenticeship fund into a scholarship display for publicity purposes. Carlos looked away, his face hard with hurt. Grandpa saw him. Everyone did. Suddenly, the room was no longer only family. It was witnesses, community, consequence. Marco pointed at me. She did this. She poisoned you against me. Grandpa's expression didn't change. Elena sent me facts. You sent me slogans. He turned another page. Her analysis showed legal risk, grant violations, flood zone complications, and damage to community partnerships this family promised to protect. She didn't ask for a title. She didn't ask for money. She asked me to look at the truth before anyone signed away a responsibility. Marco's face twisted. She's a city employee. She doesn't know how business works. Grandpa's voice sharpened. She builds systems that keep people safe. You build speeches to sell what you never earned. The silence after that was almost physical. Marco looked around for rescue. My mother looked torn between panic and denial. My father still said nothing, but this time, his silence didn't protect Marco. It exposed him. Grandpa placed both hands on the table. Tonight, I was prepared to announce a transition plan for the Martinez Trust. Marco believed that plan would place him in an advisory role. After reviewing his actions and hearing his words, that will not happen. Marco stepped back like the floor had moved. Grandpa continued. Effective immediately, Marco has no authority to speak for Martinez Works, the Martinez Trust, or the Apprenticeship Foundation. Any agreement he suggested, implied, or promised to Mercer Partners is void. Mr. Devereaux has already prepared notices. The developer stood quietly, buttoned his jacket, and left without shaking Marco's hand. That small action hit Marco harder than any insult could. His future deal walked out of the room before his eyes. Grandpa looked at me then, and his face softened just enough to break something open in my chest. Elena, I am asking you to serve as chairwoman of the Apprenticeship Foundation and voting steward for the workshop property. If you choose to accept the Martinez name, I will support that legally and publicly. But whether you change your name or not, you have already carried its meaning better than anyone at this table tonight. I couldn't speak at first. My whole life, I had wanted someone in that family to say they saw me. Just me. Marco slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. You're giving everything to her because she made me look bad. Grandpa turned back to him. No. I am trusting her because you made yourself clear. My mother finally found her voice. Marco was upset. He didn't mean to hurt Elena. Grandpa looked at her. He did mean it. And you nodded. My mother's face crumpled, but Grandpa wasn't finished. He looked at my father. And you looked away. My father's shoulders sank. No one had ever named his silence so plainly. Marco was breathing hard now, his confidence cracking in front of everyone he had tried to impress. Grandpa picked up the final document. Marco, you owe your sister an apology. Marco stayed at me. For 1 second, I thought he might do it. Then pride won. He grabbed his jacket. You'll regret this. Grandpa's reply was quiet. No, Marco. I would have regretted rewarding this. Marco walked out, but nobody followed him. Not immediately. Not this time. The door closed behind him, and the sound felt like the end of a lie our family had been telling for years. After Marco left, the room stayed silent, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of forced truth. My mother half rose from her chair, probably to run after Marco the way she always did when consequences got too close. But Grandpa said her name once, and she stopped. Sit down, Clara. For once, let him leave without teaching him that someone else will clean up what he breaks. My mother sat slowly, pale, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. My father finally looked at me, and the guilt in his eyes was almost harder to see than his silence had been. He opened his mouth, closed it, then said, I knew Marco had spoken to developers. I didn't know it had gone that far. Grandpa looked at him. You knew enough to ask Elena not to make things uncomfortable. My father flinched. For years, he had treated peace like the absence of raised voices, even when that peace required me to swallow disrespect so Marco could stay comfortable. That night, someone finally said the truth out loud. Silence can look gentle from the outside, but when it protects cruelty, it becomes a choice. Dinner did not continue. People stood in small groups, whispering, stunned by the collapse of the future Marco had advertised all evening. Mr. Devereaux spoke quietly with Grandpa. The developer was gone. The photographer Marco had hired packed his camera without taking another picture. Carlos approached me near the doorway, eyes shining, and said, Thank you. 2 words. That was all. But they meant more to me than every polished compliment my family had ever given Marco. Grandpa touched my arm and asked me to walk with him. We left the dining room through a side hallway that led to the old workshop floor behind the restaurant. One corner had been preserved with original tools, a workbench, and a faded sign that read Martinez Works. Grandpa stood in front of it for a long moment. Under the softer lights, he looked less like the powerful man who had just ended Marco's fantasy and more like the grandfather who had once taught me how to hold a wrench when I was 9. I didn't choose you because Marco hurt you, he said. I chose you because when you saw something wrong, you protected the people who would have paid the price. I swiped my face then, not because I was broken, but because I had been holding myself together for so long, I didn't know how to stop. I told him I didn't want the foundation to become a weapon against Marco. Grandpa smiled sadly. That is exactly why you can be trusted with it. I accepted the role, but I made 3 conditions. First, the apprenticeship program had to stay open. Second, a fixed part of Martina's work's profits had to support students who couldn't afford tools, transportation, or certification fees. Third, no family member would have influence over the foundation unless they respected its purpose. Grandpa agreed before I even finished. A few months later, the paperwork became official. Marco lost the Mercer Partners deal. Without the Martinez name behind him, investors stopped returning his calls. He didn't lose everything, but he lost the thing he valued most, the illusion that he was entitled to power because everyone had treated him like he was special. My mother tried to apologize in pieces, small messages, careful voicemails, sentences that began with "I never meant," and ended before responsibility fully arrived. I didn't rush to make her feel forgiven. My father wrote me a letter. It was awkward, late, and imperfect, but it was the first time he admitted that looking away had been easier than standing up for me. I kept that letter, not because it fixed the past, but because it proved he had finally stopped hiding from it. As for the Martinez name, I didn't change mine right away. Maybe people expected me to grab it like a prize after being told I didn't deserve it. But that was the lesson I learned. A name can open doors, but character decides whether you deserve to walk through them. I used the Martinez name for the new scholarship program instead. The first group of students received toolkits, transfer passes, and paid placements with local maintenance crews. At the ceremony, Grandpa sat in the front row with tears in his eyes. Carlos gave the welcome speech. My mother came quietly and sat near the back. Marco did not come. Maybe one day he will understand that losing power was not the worst thing that happened to him. The worst thing was realizing he had mistaken attention for respect and entitlement for worth. That night didn't magically heal my family. Real healing doesn't work that way. But it gave me proof that I was never invisible. I had only been standing in a room where the wrong people refused to see me. The greatest lesson I carried from all of it is this: your value is not decided by the loudest voice in your family, by the parent who favors someone else, or by the person who uses your silence against you. True worth is built through responsibility, kindness, courage, and the way you protect people when there is nothing easy to gain. A healthy family should not teach children to compete for love. It should teach them to respect character, honesty, and service. And if your family forgets that, you are still allowed to remember who you are. I walked away from that dinner not as Marco's defeated little sister, not as the daughter everyone could overlook, but as Elena Reed, a woman who finally understood that dignity does not need permission. So tell me, if your own family tried to decide your worth for you, would you stay silent, walk away, or finally speak the truth? My team and I are working hard behind the scenes to create scripts that are dramatic, meaningful, and worth your time. This story is completely fictional and created only for entertainment and educational purposes. We hope this video delivers a message about courage, self-respect, and the peace that comes from finally letting go.